Welcome to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. The first story is called Cleaning Times. I'm a university student and I work part-time at a local cinema. I've been working at the company for a fair bit of time. As you expect, one of the key parts of the job includes cleaning cinemas between showings. Now, we previously had a manager who I and many other staff members respected. She had started working as a general staff, like us, and didn't demand too much. Cleaning cinemas can take an absurdly long amount of time if the movies being shown are big. Upper management had been hounding her to reduce cleaning times so we could play more movies in a day. She explained to them that she would push us, but there wasn't a whole lot of wriggle room. Recently, we had a new manager replace our old one. Apparently, he was transferred from another company and he had no experience with cinemas. Upper management apparently hounded him too, of which he promised to cut our cleaning times by an absurd amount. When he came to us, he demanded we aim to cut our time in half. We tried to explain to him that it just wasn't feasible to thoroughly clean the cinema to a good standard in the time he was asking. We managed to cut down the times a bit, but not to what he promised. Eventually, as we left the cinema and movies stopped playing for the day, he called a meeting. He told us that we were being lazy and not putting our 100% into our work. We figured it would just be another lecture. But then he told us that we may face difficulty maintaining employment in the company if we were not out of the cinemas in his allotted time frame. We repeatedly fell short, and then one day he showed up off duty to watch a movie himself with a date. After a brief lecture about slacking off, we decided it was finally time to obey his demand. After we discovered what cinema he was to be put in, we completely abandoned any hope of cleaning the cinema properly. We walked out on the dot when he requested. He sits down on his seat and noticed the huge chocolate ice cream cone that he sat on, and the syrup-stained cup holders. He stormed out of the cinema to yell at us, of which his date noticed. Upon seeing his behavior, she promptly said, "I think I'm gonna go home for the night." The next story is called Dictate My Speech. Years ago, I worked in a very small branch of a national chain of food stores. I'd just been transferred from the still small but slightly bigger store, which was a 2-minute walk away from my new workplace in the center of the small town I lived in. Yes, we had 2 branches of the same store in a village of fewer than 5,000 people. Would you believe we used to have 3 until the smallest one closed down entirely? Due to the close proximity of the 2 stores and the fact we all shared an employer, the staff of both stores tended to be all familiar with each other. I had known the manager for a few years before my transfer took place, and we had always got along famously. For the first few months, everything ran swimmingly, as I co-managed a new bakery which had been built in the back during a recent refit. As the months wore on, however, the manager's true personality came out. First, she started bullying the colleague who had transferred with me to co-manage the bakery. Then she started on me once she realized my co-worker wouldn't show any sign of being affected by the bullying. Unfortunately, I was not so good at pretending to be unaffected, and so she fixated on making my life a living hell for the better part of a year. It got to the point where I was dreading having to ever see her. So I started looking for jobs, and as luck would have it, I scored a salaried position earning double what I currently was. As soon as I handed in my notice, my manager seemed to make it her life mission to drive me to a nervous breakdown in the few weeks she had left to do so. At this point, I finally realized that she only had power if I allowed her to. So I stopped giving her the reactions she wanted whenever she tried to make unreasonable requests, criticize my work style, etc. Instead, if she said anything to try and antagonize me, I would just smile and say okay and go and do whatever I was meant to do. As you can imagine, this got right under her skin to see she'd lost her power over me. After a couple of weeks of this, she came to the bakery one day to tell me there were multiple tasks I needed to do, the vast majority of which were pointless and not mandated by the company guidelines. After each request, I would smile and say okay. After she had finished assigning me my pointless task, she had one more request. In the most condescending tone possible, "Oh, and don't just stand there and say okay when I speak to you. It's really patronizing." I paused for a second, wanting to show that I wasn't bothered by her criticism. After a few moments, I smiled at her and went, "Alright." She gave me the fakest smile ever, then turned and walked away, visibly checking with rage that I hadn't given in to her tactics. I later found out that in the days after I left, she badmouthed me to the rest of the staff in the store. To be fair, I knew full well she was doing this before I'd even left, because the other staff would tell me. She even said to one, I wonder how long it will be before he comes back and begs me for his job back. Another time, one of the staff members even told me she'd said she didn't understand why I hadn't kept in touch after leaving. The third story is called The Bad Coworker. I worked in the office at a manufacturing plant. I handled shipping and receiving. The office pad was my coworker that handled truckloads. Another coworker handled big jobs that required a third party. The owner was a jerk and constantly thwarted any attempts to address problems. He took great joy in being sadistic and making everyone's life hell. My bad coworker joined in on this effort. He fought against any meetings or team effort at work. So everyone ended up managing their own orders, which meant a lot of fighting when you had a rush job. There was zero cooperation. We couldn't even do reasonable things like color coding paperwork so the floor knew it was a rush job. Another employee and I had tried to institute a system that when an order was complete, the plant supervisor brought the paperwork to the office to be finalized so we knew it was done. That way we didn't have to check on orders constantly to chip them or walk on the floor. Nope, when completed, the order was left in the warehouse with the paperwork on top. The day before Christmas Eve rolls around. Everyone is sort of screwing off. Boss left early for the holiday and we had a new customer with a big truckload shipment. It's the bad coworker's order. Friendly coworker and I see the order get completed, paperwork laying on top. Then the foreman, who hated the bad coworker too, moved the order behind a bunch of smaller orders. We watched him do this while smiling. It got buried in the warehouse as the plant tried to finish up everything before the long holiday. Friendly coworker and I exchanged glances, shrugged our shoulders and walked away. This was something like a 10k order and it was the boss's new big client. Not my problem. The bad coworker realized it at 4:45 but didn't have enough lead time to get the truck there. So there the order sat while the bad coworker panicked. He couldn't say anything either, because he just argued that everyone needed to be responsible for handling their own orders and he didn't want our interference. I think I even said, I don't want to interfere. Now I could have suggested we ship in individual boxes and need a lot of profit, but keep the customer, but it wasn't my problem. The boss returned and was angry. He questioned whether we saw the order, which we explained we didn't even know it was due to be trucked out because we never saw the paperwork. How would we even know what orders are moving through the plant? I only know about my orders. Cue a 10-minute scream fest about how he is sick and tired of people saying they don't know what is going on. We lost the client. The bad coworker kept his job. The owner refused to institute a policy that paperwork gets returned to the office. The last story is called Everything Equal. I work for a pretty big engineering company with around 2,500 employees spread around the world. The main part of us, I guess around 2k, works in our home country, with the main bulk stationed in 4 big offices. Besides the big offices, there are also smaller ones scattered around the country. I work in one of those. In total, we are 18 people employed at our office. This is obviously not enough people to run the reception desk, canteen, IT department and so on. That means we get on by ourselves for the most part, unless it's a bigger problem we can solve, in which case we have to call one of the main offices for help. It's a bit slower sometimes, but it's okay and we don't make a fuss. This also means that there are some differences in how stuff is done in different places. For example, in our office, the office tasks, ordering paper, organizing the storage area, arranging office get-togethers and stuff like that, are just something we all do to make things run. None of us mind, as it's just small stuff that doesn't take a lot of time. In the bigger offices, there are people employed to handle all that stuff. Well, one of our company perks is that every Friday we get 30 minutes of paid breakfast in the office. In the bigger offices, there's a canteen where they arrange the breakfast, so the employees just have to waltz down, eat and go back to work. In our office, we take turns going to the nearest bakery and buying breakfast, then go to a grocery store and get stuff to put on the bread. All in our own time before coming in. We'll get the breakfast reimbursed, but not the time. Again, we didn't mind the arrangement, and neither did the facility managers stationed in the main offices. What they suddenly did have a problem with is that we have a habit of buying some morning cakes, cinnamon buns or whatever we felt like that day to go with the breakfast. One day my boss got a mail from them with a list of what the breakfast could contain and nothing else. He also got a budget for each person, because it had to be equal for all offices. That meant we couldn't get our cakes anymore, and neither cold cuts of meat for our bread. both because it wasn't on the list and because we often went a little bit over budget. The office was in an uproar, I tell you. Don't mess with an engineer's breakfast. So we comply and only buy the stuff we are allowed to. But we hatch out a plan. If they want it all to be equal, all will have to be equal. This means all of us start putting 30 minutes each Friday on the company as we are entitled to. Before, we often just put a smaller amount of time down, or we just didn't, and the time disappeared to other tasks which the company could bill to clients. This means 9 hours each week of lost time. Already a lot more than what the breakfast cost extra. We also asked for somewhere to put the time we spent collecting breakfast and cleaning afterward, as the other offices didn't have to do it themselves. And it had to be equal. Lastly, we made a list of other stuff we don't have that the other offices do. We named every small thing we could come up with, including but not limited to IT department, receptionist, kitchen worker to help collect and make the breakfast, facility worker to keep storage stocked up, and fancy coffee machine. We had an old regular coffee maker. Other offices had fancy automatic ones with different blends and stuff. The list had around 15 to 20 bullet points of varying pettiness. My boss sends the list to the main office and tells them we need this for all things to be equal as you wanted. Well, we now have a fancy coffee machine, costing around 8k to get installed because a new water line had to be drawn to where it's placed. And a much bigger maintenance cost because of different blends, cleaning and so on. Meanwhile, we are all waiting for our IT department to get set up, but I'm guessing we'll get our cakes back before that happens. And with that, we end today's video. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories and today's video? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.